In March of 1968, a Soviet Golf II-class ballistic missile submarine departed its base at Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky on the Kamchatka Peninsula and headed into the North Pacific. The Cold War was at its height. K-129 carried 98 crew members and 3 R-21 nuclear ballistic missiles, weapons with the range to strike the western United States. The patrol had been classified as routine, one of dozens the Soviet Navy ran each year across the Pacific. K-129 would follow a set course, surface at scheduled intervals for radio check-ins, and return to Kamchatka without incident. The crew was experienced. The submarine had completed similar patrols before. There was no reason to expect anything unusual. The submarine would never return, and the effort to find out why would become one of the most audacious intelligence operations in history. When K-129 failed to transmit at its first scheduled radio check-in, the Soviet Pacific Fleet waited. Submarines occasionally missed a window: atmospheric interference, equipment glitches, operational caution. But when the second check-in passed in silence, and then the third, the Navy mobilized. They launched a massive search across the North Pacific, destroyers, patrol aircraft, and other submarines scouring thousands of square miles of ocean for weeks. They found nothing. No wreckage, no oil slick, no debris, no emergency buoy. 98 men and a nuclear-armed submarine had vanished without a single trace.
But the Americans knew exactly where it was. While the Soviet fleet searched the wrong stretches of ocean, the United States Navy had already pinpointed the submarine's grave, using a surveillance system the Soviets didn't even know existed.
SOSUS, a Cold War network of hydrophones anchored across the ocean floor, had captured the acoustic signature of K-129's destruction in March 1968. Analysts traced the sound to a specific location, roughly 1,600 miles northwest of Hawaii, in water nearly 5,000 meters deep. What lay on that ocean floor was an intelligence goldmine. Nuclear warheads, missile guidance systems, codebooks, and encryption hardware. If the CIA could recover it before the Soviets realized what had happened, it would be the most significant intelligence coup of the entire Cold War. The challenge was the depth itself. No salvage operation had ever attempted anything remotely close to 3 miles underwater. The CIA needed a plan and a cover story equally extraordinary. The agency's solution was Project Azorian. They recruited billionaire Howard Hughes and his Summa Corporation to publicly announce a deep-sea mining venture, harvesting manganese nodules from the Pacific floor. Hughes's well-known reclusive nature made the cover story perfectly plausible. The most expensive covert CIA mission ever was being constructed in plain sight. Behind that public facade, engineers built the Glomar Explorer, a 618-foot vessel with a hidden moon pool beneath its hull, large enough to accommodate an entire submarine. Inside, they designed a mechanical capture vehicle, essentially a massive steel claw that would descend miles down a pipe string, grip K-129's hull, and haul it back to the surface. Shipyard workers, journalists, the public, everyone saw only what they were meant to see: a billionaire's eccentric mining operation. 6 years of engineering, over $800 million spent, all for a single attempt at the ocean floor. In the summer of 1974, the Glomar Explorer positioned itself directly above the wreck site in the central North Pacific. The capture vehicle descended through 3 miles of darkness, locked onto the submarine's forward section and began the agonizing ascent. Thousands of meters of pipe strained under the weight as the wreck rose through crushing pressure. It seemed like it might actually work, but partway up, the hull fractured. A massive section broke free and plummeted back into the abyss, taking with it what was likely the most valuable intelligence: the missiles, the codebooks, the cryptographic systems. After 6 years and over $800 million, the ocean had kept most of what mattered. The recovered portion held the remains of 6 Soviet sailors. The CIA conducted a burial at sea with full military honors. The ceremony performed in Russian, a Soviet naval ensign draped over the remains, filmed and then locked away in classified archives. The Soviet Union never learned what became of their men. What actually made it to the surface remains classified. Some intelligence assessments suggest 2 nuclear torpedoes were recovered, while the ballistic missiles went down with the fallen section. Others indicate cryptographic materials and partial codebooks that could have compromised Soviet naval communications for years. Every declassified document has had the recovered materials inventory redacted. When journalist Seymour Hersh exposed the operation in 1975, the CIA's legal team crafted a response that would define government secrecy for decades. "We can neither confirm nor deny." That phrase, the Glomar response, was born directly from this operation. Partial declassifications in 2010 confirmed the mission occurred, but the full Project Azorian report has never been released. K-129 still lies on the Pacific floor, mostly undisturbed. 98 men went down with it. 6 were recovered and given honors by the very nation that had hunted them during the Cold War. The rest remained 3 miles below the surface in one of the ocean's most remote regions. What caused the sinking has never been conclusively determined. Hydrogen explosion in the batteries, propellant leak in the missile tubes, catastrophic failure of the diving planes. Soviet records opened after the USSR's collapse provided no definitive answer. The crew took the truth with them.
1968 turned out to be the deadliest year in submarine history. K-129, the USS Scorpion, the Israeli Dakar, and the French Minerve, 4 submarines from 4 nations, all lost within months. What happened to K-129 has been partially answered. Why it sank has never been. The CIA spent 6 years and $800 million trying to pull a submarine's secrets from the Pacific floor, and the ocean crushed the hull before they could finish. K-129's answers are either classified or destroyed. But not every maritime mystery involves a vessel that went down. Sometimes a ship arrives at port completely intact, still warm with life, yet utterly abandoned. Sometime around 1750, an English merchant vessel appeared off Rhode Island heading toward Newport under full sail. Everything about her looked like a routine arrival: sails set, rigging intact, hull riding at normal waterline. Newport was a busy colonial port. Harbor pilots would have recognized most ships by sight. But what made the Seabird stand out that morning wasn't her arrival. It was the complete absence of any crew visible on deck. No one was working the sails. No one was at the helm. No one was steering. The ship was sailing herself into harbor, fully rigged and moving underway, with no human guidance.
She eventually ran aground in the shallows. When local fishermen and dock workers rowed out expecting to find a vessel in distress, they discovered something far stranger.
The boarding party found a ship still warm with recent life. Stoves were burning in the galley. Coffee sat hot on the counter. A meal waited on the table as if someone had stepped away moments before. The ship's cat and dog were still aboard, pacing the deck. Cargo sat undisturbed in the hold. The hull was sound, the rigging intact. But every crew member had vanished. No bodies, no missing lifeboat, no farewell message. The captain's quarters were perfectly ordered, navigation tools stowed, personal effects untouched. There was no sign of panic or hasty departure.
The stoves were still burning, the coffee still hot. Someone had been actively tending them mere minutes before the ship was spotted approaching the harbor, with no one on deck. Whatever took the crew did so instantly and completely.
Pirates wouldn't leave cargo untouched. A waterspout might sweep people overboard, but not selectively. The animals would have gone too, and the ship would show damage. The crew couldn't have gone ashore and gotten stranded, because someone was actively feeding those stoves right up until the moment the seabird was spotted approaching harbor.
If the crew had fallen overboard in a freak wave, the stoves would be doused and the animals gone. If disease had killed them, bodies would remain. If they'd been taken by force, there would be signs of struggle. But there was nothing. Just a pristine ship and a crew that had simply ceased to exist.
The most straightforward explanation, that an entire crew voluntarily abandoned a seaworthy, valuable vessel without their belongings, without launching a lifeboat, and without being seen by anyone, is also the one that explains nothing at all.
Within days of the discovery, a violent storm struck the coast and destroyed the seabird where she lay in the shallows. The hull was smashed apart, the cargo scattered into the sea. Whatever physical evidence might have explained the crew's disappearance was obliterated before any formal investigation could begin.
No crew member ever reappeared. No bodies washed ashore. No survivor came forward. The ship had arrived with warm coffee, burning stoves, and living animals, then erased itself before anyone could piece together what happened. But the deeper problem is this: there is no confirmed primary source documentation proving the seabird ever existed at all. The story first appeared in mid-19th century folklore collections, published more than 100 years after the supposed events. No harbor logs from the 1750s record the ship's arrival. No colonial newspapers covered it. No customs records mention a vessel by that name entering Newport Harbor. So either this was a genuine 18th century maritime mystery whose records were lost to time, or it's a ghost story that hardened into accepted fact through repetition. The physical details are too specific to dismiss outright. The burning stoves, the hot coffee, the cat and dog on deck. Someone either witnessed those details or invented them with extraordinary precision. Did the seabird actually exist? If it did, who destroyed every official record of its arrival? And if it didn't, who crafted a story detailed enough to include warm coffee and a ship's cat? And why? No crew member was ever identified by name. No passenger manifest surfaced. No insurance claim was ever filed. The ship left behind more questions than any physical trace, and even that trace was erased by a storm within days. The Seabird remains a vessel that might never have existed, carrying a crew that certainly vanished. A ghost ship in the most literal sense, suspended between folklore and fact,
with the evidence too specific to ignore and too absent to prove. The seabird may have never existed at all, but the next vessel is thoroughly documented. HMS Eurydice was real. Her crew was real, 319 men, most of them young sailors on their first major voyage. Her destruction was witnessed, investigated, and still not fully explained. And it would haunt the English Channel for over a century. HMS Eurydice was a 26-gun corvette built in 1843, long since converted into a training vessel for the Royal Navy. By 1878, she was outdated, a wooden sailing ship in an age of steam and iron. But she served her purpose well, taking young recruits on extended cruises to give them their first real experience at sea. The ship had just completed a training cruise to Bermuda and the West Indies with 319 men aboard, mostly teenage cadets on their first major voyage. Morale was high. The Atlantic crossing had gone smoothly. By the morning of March 24th, the Isle of Wight was in sight, and Portsmouth just hours away. The English Channel in late March presented no real danger. Home waters, the harbor practically visible. It was supposed to be the easiest part of the entire voyage. Around 3:30 in the afternoon, a violent snow squall struck without warning. The sky went dark. Temperature plunged. A northwest wind hit Eurydice broadside with tremendous force. Because her gun ports were open for ventilation, seawater rushed through the openings as the ship heeled sharply to port. The incoming water shifted her balance catastrophically. She rolled onto her beam ends and sank, the entire catastrophe unfolding in minutes. 319 men were suddenly in the freezing English Channel, wearing only light working clothes. The water was barely above freezing. Passing ships heard screams through the driving snow and saw the masts vanishing beneath the surface. By the time rescue boats arrived, the squall had already passed. The sun returned. The wind died. The water went flat. But 317 men were gone. Only 2 survived. Benjamin Cuttaford and Sidney Fletcher were pulled from the water barely alive, clinging to floating wreckage. The bodies that were recovered told their own story. Many still wore light working clothes with no jackets. Several had their boots on, meaning they'd been at their stations when the squall hit. Not one man had donned a lifebelt. No boats had been launched. Divers found the wreck within days in shallow water close enough to shore that the masts were nearly visible at low tide. The hull lay largely intact on its side on the seabed, gun ports still open, the very openings that had sealed the ship's fate. The masts had snapped during the capsize but remained tangled in the rigging. A complete warship resting on the bottom, in sight of home. The Admiralty's Court of Inquiry focused on one question. Why were those gun ports open in the English Channel in late March? The answer was straightforward. The weather had been fine all afternoon, and no one anticipated a squall of such violence. It was extremely rare in those waters at that time of year. The inquiry cleared Captain Marcus Hare of negligence, classifying the loss as an unpredictable act of weather. But something troubled the investigators and was never fully resolved. With over 300 fit men aboard, why had the ship gone down so catastrophically fast that only 2 survived? Some questioned whether Eurydice's 1843 design or modifications made for training use had compromised her stability. Whether cargo loaded in Bermuda had shifted her center of gravity, no structural cause was ever definitively proven. After the official inquiry closed and the wreck was cleared from the seabed, the story took an unexpected turn. Sailors and fishermen near the Isle of Wight began reporting sightings of a full-rigged ship in the strait where Eurydice had gone down, visible for brief moments before vanishing, always matching the profile of a 19th century warship.
These weren't casual observers. They were experienced mariners and naval officers trained to recognize ships by their rigging and silhouette. The most striking report came in 1930, when a British submarine crew officially logged their sighting of an old-fashioned sailing vessel in the exact waters where Eurydice had sunk 52 years earlier.
The Navy recorded the report, offered no explanation, identified no matching vessel in the area. The sighting was never disputed or retracted.
Was HMS Eurydice still sailing those waters? Almost certainly not. But the men who reported seeing her knew precisely what a Victorian-era corvette looked like. They saw something real. No one has ever explained what it was.
Eurydice was destroyed by something no one could have predicted. A freak squall that lasted minutes and killed over 300 men. But the next vessel's fate was entirely preventable. Her builders knew she was unstable. Her officers suspected it. A stability test had confirmed it. Yet somehow no one told the king, the one person who could have stopped what was about to happen. In the early 17th century, Sweden, under King Gustav II Adolf, was building an empire and needed a navy to match. In 1625, he ordered the construction of what was meant to be the most formidable warship in the Baltic Sea. The Vasa was designed to be massive, heavily armed, and elaborately decorated, a floating statement of Swedish military dominance. She carried 64 bronze cannons across 2 full gun decks, with hundreds of gilded carvings covering every surface in gold and color. Lions, angels, emperors. The ship was meant not just to fight, but to intimidate. Construction began at Stockholm's Royal Shipyard in 1626 under master builder Henrik Heibertson. Almost immediately, a critical problem became apparent to everyone involved. The ship was becoming dangerously top-heavy. The narrow hull couldn't support the weight being stacked above it. But no one told the king. Heibertson recognized the instability from the start. The proportions were fundamentally wrong. Too much weight concentrated high above the waterline. A stability test conducted before launch had 30 men running back and forth across the deck, and the ship rolled so violently that the test had to be abandoned after just 3 passes. That alarming result made its way up through the naval administration to the King's Council. But nothing happened. Heibertson had died before the test was carried out. His successor lacked the authority to contradict a wartime monarch. The shipbuilders understood the mathematics of ballast and center of gravity perfectly well. They could see the danger in those proportions before the hull even left the dock. Yet fear kept them silent. The king had been explicit: 64 cannons, regardless of whether the ship could actually carry them. No one was willing to tell Gustav Adolf that his warship couldn't float. On August 10, 1628, a warm Sunday afternoon, Stockholm's waterfront filled with crowds eager to witness the maiden voyage of Sweden's most formidable warship. Dignitaries lined the harbor. The Vasa's crew took their stations, gunports open, flags snapping in the breeze. The king himself was absent, away on campaign, but his ambition sailed with every timber.
As the Vasa cast off and moved slowly across the harbor, her cannons fired a salute that echoed off the water. For the first few hundred meters, everything appeared flawless. Then, an ordinary gust of wind caught her sails. On any well-built vessel, that breeze would have simply pushed the ship forward. On the Vasa, it proved catastrophic. The ship heeled sharply to port. Water poured through the open gunports. The incoming water's weight pulled her further over. Within minutes, she was on her side, masts submerged, hull flooding. Just 1,300 meters from where she'd cast off, Sweden's most expensive warship sank to the harbor bottom, taking between 30 and 50 people with her. The waterfront crowd watched the entire arc, from the ceremonial salute to the sinking, unfold in roughly 20 minutes. She hadn't been struck by an enemy, hadn't hit a rock, hadn't weathered a storm. An ordinary breeze had capsized the fleet's most powerful ship in full view of the capital. King Gustav demanded answers. A court-martial convened immediately, questioning the surviving captain, the shipbuilders, and the naval administrators. Everyone blamed everyone else. The captain pointed to the design, the builders pointed to the king's specifications, the administrators cited the stability reports they had forwarded to the council. No one was convicted. No one was formally punished. Assigning real blame would have meant pointing directly at the king. The inquiry concluded that the Vasa's sinking was everyone's fault and no one's fault simultaneously. Then closed. The engineering failure was straightforward. The Vasa was too narrow for her towering superstructure. Her stone ballast couldn't counterbalance the weight of 2 gun decks, 64 bronze cannons, and hundreds of heavy carved ornaments piled above the waterline. She had been built for magnificence, not for floating. For over 3 centuries, the Vasa lay buried in Stockholm Harbor's cold, oxygen-poor mud. 17th century salvage operations recovered the valuable bronze cannons, but left the wooden hull untouched. By the 20th century, most people had forgotten she was there at all. In 1956, amateur archaeologist Anders Franzen located the wreck after years of patient research and systematic harbor surveys. The 1961 salvage operation became one of the most complex marine recoveries ever attempted. When the Vasa broke the surface for the first time in 333 years, the Baltic's cold, brackish water had preserved nearly everything: the wood, the carvings, the painted surfaces, even the open gunports that had sealed her fate. Today, the Vasa stands in Stockholm's purpose-built museum, drawing over 1 million visitors yearly as the world's only nearly complete 17th century warship. The 64 cannons still sit where the shipbuilders placed them nearly 400 years ago. The gilded carvings that added fatal weight still gleam under museum lights. The real mystery isn't what happened. That's been understood since the afternoon she went down. It's why no one stopped it. The builders knew she was top-heavy. The stability test proved it beyond question. The naval administrators were informed. And yet, a ship everyone knew would capsize was sent to sea with hundreds of people aboard. The shipbuilders knew. The officers suspected. The test confirmed it. And still the Vasa sailed, not because of wind or water or open gunports, but because no one dared say what everyone already knew. A Soviet submarine 3 miles down in the Pacific, still holding classified nuclear secrets. A colonial merchant ship that may never have existed at all, arriving with hot coffee and a ship's cat before vanishing from the record. A Royal Navy training vessel capsized by a snow squall that lasted minutes and killed over 300 men within sight of home. And a Swedish warship that sank 1,300 meters into her maiden voyage, not from enemy fire or storm, but from the fear her builders had of their king.
K-129 secrets remain locked in a CIA vault in Langley. The Seabird's evidence was destroyed by a conveniently timed storm. Eurydice's ghost was reportedly spotted by a submarine crew 52 years after she went down. And the Vasa now sits preserved in a museum, every fatal flaw on display, every gilded carving that added the weight that sank her, still gleaming under controlled light. 4 ships, 4 centuries, different cargo, different waters, different reasons for going down. But each left behind the same thing, a gap between what was known and what was said, between what the evidence shows and what the records confirm. The wrecks are still down there, the crew lists still incomplete, the classified files still sealed, the questions still open. Some of those gaps will never close.